What if the reason you feel empty after success is because it was never yours? What if you weren't chasing growth, but approval, and the applause was never meant to make you feel whole? You don't notice it at first. The decisions still look like yours. You work harder, you improve, you level up, and people respond. They notice, they compliment, they validate, and something inside you shifts, not dramatically, just enough. Enough for your motivation to change direction. You begin anticipating reactions. How this will look, how this will be received, how this will be interpreted. And slowly, achievement stops being internal. It becomes visible. It becomes measurable. It becomes performative. You start adjusting yourself in small ways, sharpening certain traits, hiding others, choosing what's impressive over what's aligned. Not because you're fake, because being seen feels powerful, and being approved feels safe. But safety built on reaction is unstable, because the moment the reaction weakens, so does your certainty. And that's when the emptiness begins. Not after failure, after applause. Validation feels harmless. It feels social, human, normal. Of course you care what people think. Of course you want to be respected, admired, valued. But there's a quiet difference between appreciation and dependence. Appreciation is a bonus. Dependence is a requirement. And when approval becomes a requirement, your decisions start filtering through one question. How will this be perceived? Not, is this right for me? Not, does this fit who I am becoming? But, will this impress? You start optimizing for reaction, choosing visible wins over meaningful progress, public milestones over private growth. You may earn more, achieve more, post more, and still feel less grounded, because the source of motivation has moved. It no longer comes from alignment. It comes from response. And response is unpredictable. Some days it's loud. Some days it's silent. And on silent days, you feel smaller than you should. Not because you've regressed, but because nobody confirmed you. And when confidence depends on confirmation, it fluctuates with the crowd, rises when praised, drops when ignored. That is conditional confidence. And conditional confidence never rests. Today, validation is everywhere. Not because people became weaker, because the environment changed. In the past, approval came from a small circle. Family, friends, a workplace, a community. Now it comes from strangers, numbers, views, likes, followers, comments, shares. And the brain treats those numbers like meaning, because every reaction is a signal. Someone saw me, someone agrees, someone approves. And when the signals arrive consistently, you start expecting them. You don't even realize it. You post something and you check. Not once. Again. Then again. A few minutes later. And if the response is weaker than usual, your mood shifts. You tell yourself it doesn't matter, but your attention keeps returning. Because validation is a reward, and rewards train behavior. So without noticing, you begin shaping yourself to get more of it. You choose what performs. You repeat what worked. You avoid what might be ignored. And slowly, expression becomes strategy. You start living with an invisible audience in your head, even when you're alone, even when no one is watching. You imagine reactions in advance, and that changes what you do, what you say, what you pursue, what you hide. Not because you're dishonest, because being ignored feels like disappearance. And the modern world offers a simple trade: visibility in exchange for authenticity. Most people don't take the trade on purpose. They drift into it. One post, one compliment, one moment of recognition, and suddenly, the idea of not being noticed starts to feel like falling behind. In relationships, validation works differently. It's quieter, more intimate, harder to detect. You don't chase likes, you chase reassurance. You want to be chosen, wanted, needed, and that's natural. But when validation becomes central, you stop relating and start performing. You adjust your tone, your opinions, your preferences, not in dramatic ways, in subtle ones. You avoid disagreement. You soften your boundaries. You laugh when something doesn't sit right. Because harmony feels safer than authenticity, and the approval you receive feels like stability. They're happy, they're calm, they're satisfied. So you tell yourself everything is fine. But inside, a small part of you keeps shrinking. Because every time you trade honesty for approval, you reinforce a message. My real self might not be enough. And over time, you forget which parts were edited and which were original. You start measuring your worth through someone else's reactions. If they're distant, you feel anxious. If they're warm, you feel secure. Your emotional state becomes responsive, not grounded. And that makes love feel unstable. Not because the relationship is broken, because your identity inside it is conditional. You begin asking, are they still happy with me? Instead of, am I still aligned with myself? And when approval becomes the foundation, you live carefully. Careful not to lose. Careful not to upset. Careful not to disappoint. But careful living is exhausting. And exhaustion eventually turns into resentment. Not toward them, toward yourself. For slowly disappearing in exchange for being accepted. At its core, the need for validation is biological. Your brain is wired to seek belonging. For most of human history, rejection meant danger. Isolation meant vulnerability. So approval became safety, and safety became reward. When someone affirms you, your brain releases dopamine. Not a massive surge, a small reinforcement. A signal that says, you're accepted, you're safe, you're valued. And the brain learns quickly. It connects the behavior to the reward. Do this, feel accepted. Say this, feel seen. Achieve this, feel important. And once that loop forms, it starts shaping your identity. You don't just want approval. You begin organizing yourself around it. You anticipate what will earn it. You avoid what might threaten it. And the more your identity depends on reaction, the less stable it becomes. Because reaction is unstable. Trends change. Audiences shift. People's expectations evolve. What impressed yesterday might be ignored tomorrow. And if your self-worth is built externally, every fluctuation feels personal. Silence feels like rejection. Criticism feels like collapse. Indifference feels like invisibility. Over time, you don't even realize how much of your behavior is calibrated for approval. You think you're choosing freely, but your brain is optimizing for safety. And safety, in this case, means being liked. That's why validation is so addictive. Not because it's shallow, because it touches survival wiring. And survival wiring is powerful. Stronger than logic. Stronger than intention. Unless you become aware of it. There's a man who built his entire career on being impressive, smart, quick, articulate. He learned early that praise followed performance, so he performed. In meetings, in conversations, online. He became the person who always had an answer, always had insight, always had something valuable to add. And people responded. They admired him. They relied on him. They respected him. And he felt strong. Until one day, the response slowed. A new hire entered the room. Younger, sharper, more current. The attention shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough. And suddenly, his confidence felt thinner. He worked harder, spoke more, pushed his opinions further, not because he had something new to say, because he needed to feel seen again. And when recognition didn't come the way it used to, frustration grew, then anxiety, then quiet panic, not because he lost his skill, because he lost the mirror that reflected it back to him. That's the cost of external validation. When your sense of self depends on feedback, any shift in feedback feels like erosion. He didn't collapse. He didn't fail. He just felt smaller without the spotlight. And that's when the question appeared, who am I when nobody is reacting? The solution isn't to stop caring what people think. That would be unrealistic. We are social. We are wired for connection. We are influenced by feedback. The real shift happens when approval stops being the source of your worth, when it becomes feedback, not fuel. There's a difference between visibility and alignment. Visibility asks, how does this look? Alignment asks, does this feel true? Visibility is loud, immediate, rewarding. Alignment is quiet, slow, often unnoticed. But alignment compounds. When you choose based on what fits your structure, your strengths, your values, your long-term direction, confidence stabilizes. Not because people clap, because you recognize yourself. And when recognition comes from within, external approval becomes optional. Nice, encouraging, appreciated, but not required. That's the difference. Because if your identity depends on reaction, you will constantly adjust, and constant adjustment erodes clarity. Eventually, you won't know whether a goal excites you or just impresses others. You won't know whether a decision feels right or just looks successful. And that's how validation slowly replaces direction, not by destroying your life, by redirecting it, quietly, subtly, one adjustment at a time. So the real question isn't, do I care about approval? It's this: if nobody reacted, if nobody praised, if nobody noticed, would you still want the same things? Would you still move the same way? Would you still be proud of your progress? Because the moment you can answer yes, that's the moment your growth becomes yours again. And when growth is yours, emptiness disappears. Not because the applause got louder, because you no longer need it to feel whole.